Next speaker will be Sean Culley. He is the author of a great book called Transition Point, a magnum opus, better than all the books of Harari altogether, because there's more depth and more focus on real business and supply chain. So without further ado, I would like to give the floor to Sean Culley. So Sean, welcome. And I would say the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. It's a real pleasure to be invited to speak at inNOWvate once again. The one downside of that, of course, is I needed some new material. So having to pull together some stuff to really excite and invite your audience. So without further ado, I'd like to go on to my presentation if I can. Okay, so I'm going to talk about learning to thrive in the upswing. And for those people who know me, sorry, I'm just waiting for my slide to click on. I've been talking about why the world is so VUCA for some time, why we've been going through this sort of period of disruptive change, and really trying to understand what the causes of this were, and also what that means for the economy and society moving forward. And the main reason for this is that the change is cyclical, it's not linear. And we've got a major upswing period where there's lots of experimentation and entrepreneurship. And then we have a downswing where focus moves away from innovation to sort of making money from money and from exploiting the existing technological revolutions. And these waves are around 40 to 50 years long. And so certainly through the 1990s through to the sort of 2000s, to the financial crash, we were very much in the downswing. And now we're very much in the upswing. And this is why in the upswing period, each new wave it's not only disruptive, but it's also dangerous. We have seen a lot of issues, and what's going on inside of Paris right now, and with things like the Black Lives Matter movement, for example. All of these issues are taking place, but the very similar issues were taking place at the start of the first industrial revolution over in England, when the French Revolution was taking place. And it's really about a sort of growth of inequality that's taking place between, the winners and the losers, people who have capital and those who only have their labor to sell. And of course, this is a time of great unpredictability and uncertainty. We've seen black swan events such as the pandemic, but what really catches people out is not necessarily the events, but the reactions to those events, and then the consequences as those reactions. And it becomes incredibly hard to plan and accommodate for that. So, for example, one of the companies that I've been helping is in the pet care industry, and obviously provides dog food and cat food. So, to try and plan for a pandemic that then causes the population to be housebound, and for that housebound population to be lonely, so they buy more cats and more dogs, and that's create an increase in dog food and cat food sales. There wouldn't have been a planning model in the world capable of actually doing that. It's a whole series of events that you wouldn't have expected and certainly wouldn't have planned for. And this is the kind of unpredictability and uncertainty we're seeing in this stage of the wave. And what we're seeing is that the leaning of the supply chains in the downswing has left them perilously exposed in the upswing. So, most of the companies found out the true cost of low cost. Offshoring exposed supply chains to more risk and longer lead times. Many supply chains now lack resilience. Resilience is now a major strategic initiative in most organizations because they're starting to break down in the face of multi-country disruptions. Cost control requires a high degree of predictability, and we quite simply don't have a high degree of predictability right now. And cost control in itself is very much a downswing behavior, and we're going to be in the upswing now for at least the next decade. So we need to change. And what's happening in this upswing period is we're seeing a number of major paradigm shifts. We're moving from the company being in control to the consumer being in control. We've moved from one single, very fixed cost channel, moving things into retailers, for example, to multiple variable cost omni-channels. We're moving from physical shopping to online shopping. We've moved from a world where the consumer travels to the retailer and pretty much travels to the retailer just at weekends mostly, to the retailer travels to the consumer when the consumer wants. So to accommodate that, we've moved from linear push supply chains to cyclical pull value chains. Consumers don't just want products now, they want services and they want experiences. We're moving away from ownership into access of assets, And we're moving away also from the humans doing all the physical tasks to machines doing that, as well as some of the white-collar knowledge work. From a consumer perspective, there's been a big move away from sort of long-term commitments, ownership and investment, and much more driven around sort of instant access to and immediate convenience and instant gratification. And convenience is a big thing. And I'm going to talk a little bit about, how technology is being used to try and support this increasing demand for convenience and immediate access. You see, we're about to, as I say, we're in the upswing, and this is from 2018. This is 2018's Gartner hype cycle. Now, the reason why I'm showing 2018's hype cycle is because I think this has a really accurate reflection of the products that are just coming out of the trough of disillusionment now and are about to really start to hit the market over the next 12 to 24 months. So we're seeing a lot of things here, from autonomous vehicles to quantum computing to digital twins. All these things, we've gone from sort of vaporware, things that we've talked about, to things that we now actually see. And this is causing what I call the creative destruction triple whammy. We're moving from a world where it was human hands and human sweat that did a lot of physical tasks across the end-to-end supply chain, to where machines are increasingly getting smart enough to do things that we always assumed human fingers would have to do, like pick very perishable fruit from the fields or put things on shelves. We've now got the second whammy, which is vertical convergence, or the replacement of human knowledge work with machines. And this is the one that has most people spooked, because we haven't really ever seen this before. And then whammy number 3 is machine to machine. So it's the automation of the end-to-end supply chain, with effectively machine brains driving the actions of machine hands and capturing data and feeding it back to these algorithms and using them to ultimately get smarter, in the same way Martin talked about his knowledge base getting smarter. So we're seeing a logistics revolution, and it's being driven predominantly by e-commerce. And a number of these technologies that we've talked about for a number of years, and I've been talking about since 2012, have now really crossed the chasm and are in the mainstream. We expect to see drones, on the roads, I would say, within the next sort of 12 months. We've been talking about it for a long time now. They're pretty prevalent in places like China. Autonomous vehicles are about to cross the chasm. Elon Musk keeps promising it, his semi-truck any time now. Starship robots have already crossed the chasm. We can see them in a number of different cities in the United States, but specifically across the UK as well. They've just reached 1.5 million successful deliveries. Agility Robotics has partnered with Ford to try and get that little bit of the last 10 meters of the last mile, so to speak, the actual moving goods to the doorsteps. We've got collaborations between Daimler and Starship Robots to put robots on autonomous vans that move to suburban areas, and to handle the picking and packing and dispatch of these items so quickly. ASRS systems, automatic storage and retrieval systems, these automated warehouses are being used the vertical space as much as the horizontal space, and are being completely redesigned because they basically don't need humans to pick and pack them. Technology is also being developed specifically to remove barriers and inconveniences. So we're starting to engage with technology in the same way that we engage with humans, via voice, via sight, via touch. So we've seen now for a couple of years our ability to talk to machines, and as the translation services get better and the voice recognition services get better, then this is increasingly becoming very, very natural. We're even seeing this adopted into supply chain planning systems such as ERA, where you simply ask it for forecast updates or sales updates or inventory updates by voice, and it returns the answers by voice. We're seeing 24/7 shopping remove the complete inconvenience of the bit at the end of the shopping experience, the bit that no one likes. We've also seen and starting to see, biometric payment systems. So, in China, they've got something called Smile to Pay, where you use your face in order to pay. Amazon has just rolled out something called Amazon One, where it's using, your hand as your credit card effectively, and you just need to scan it over a device. And it would recognize that as if you've just done a tap and go with your credit card. Now, one of the things that's really interesting is that COVID has obviously provided rocket fuel for this automation revolution. It's completely fast-tracked this, and it's moved a lot of the laggards into the sort of space of the leaders. So we might have expected it to be a very long time before, especially senior people moved away from checks and cash and these sorts of things, and certainly embraced things like online shopping. But of course, they've had to. They've had to embrace it. They've had no choice. And the reason for that is obviously, COVID has changed the very nature of our, human interactions and our behaviors. So it's a change to behaviours and create expectations that are now becoming very much embedded in the DNA of society. So the population's been forced to use online shopping versus physical, and food deliveries versus restaurants. We've been taught to avoid handling cash because we don't want the germs on it. We want on-demand access to goods and services. We're looking for non-biological delivery methods. People have gravitated towards more locally fresh produced goods. A lot of people have realized that avoiding travel to the office actually isn't a bad thing. They quite like it. There's avoiding social distance and large gatherings and really trying to minimize the human contact. Now, the disruptive outcome of all of these impacts is that we're seeing an e-commerce boom and seeing obviously the death of all the large shopping malls, which people like Amazon are repurposing into fulfillment centers. We're seeing a change of business models for food establishment, pubs, restaurants, all being able to sort of deliver goods to customers rather than just expecting them to come to them. We're moving towards these cashless contact and payment systems I talked about. Increasingly, people want a faster delivery service, so speed is becoming everything. So 1-hour delivery offerings using automated urban warehouses. People are preferring drone robots and delivery robots and drones to humans because there's no one touching the goods. Again, there's demand for fresh produce. Hybrid working is going to be the new normal. I don't think we're going to go back to everyone going back to the office. That's not going to happen. It's going to be a hybrid model moving forwards. In fact, a number of major organizations have already said that. There's going to be a reduction in congestion, traffic and car parking, declining group-based activities. Obviously, I don't think we're going to go back to them in the same numbers we had before, but we have seen a boom in home-based entertainment, for example. And this cashierless, just walk-out shopping is going to become the new normal because once people experience it, they're not going to want to go back to the old model of queuing that we used to have before. Now, the reality of this upswing period is what we're finding out is that, we're too slow. Humans are too slow. Our forecasts have been far too accurate. Our data points are too numerous. Whoops, my slides are going all over the place for no apparent reason. My black swans are too common. My human behavior is too irrational. And my expectations are becoming far too demanding. So what we're saying is that supply chains actually now need to adapt in real time. And of course, the traditional ERP systems and their sort of end-of-day batch runs and such just isn't quick enough. So what we're seeing now is we're seeing a move to a more cognitive computing system. And this has sort of 4 levels of maturity. Effectively, level 1 is descriptive diagnosis, where these systems are able to accurately describe what's happening in our supply chains. Level 2 is predictive, where we're actually starting to not say what's going on in our supply chains, but actually predict what's happening based on actions. Or level 3 is prescriptive, so now we can use this information to start to prescribe actions, create recommendations for the people who work in the supply chain planner as to what actions to take. And level 4 is this self-driving, fully autonomous solution. So we're moving from level 1 and level 2, where humans make the decisions using data from machines, to level 3, where humans are making decisions using recommendations from machines, to level 4, where machines make the decisions and then are reporting to the humans afterwards. And we're already at level 4. So systems like ERA, for example, have already achieved this, and companies like J&J and Merck and Unilever are already rolling out, this fully autonomous supply chain solutions, where around about, I think J&J reported around about 60% of its product base now was being run, pretty much fully autonomously. We are getting some really interesting feedback from that, though, because of course the big problem we're seeing is that we're at the start of this upswing, and it's going to continue. So the data inputs we're going to receive once the Internet of Things rolls out is going to increase exponentially. Machine brain power is also improving exponentially as well to match that. But our sad old human cognitive capability remains relatively static. So systems like ERA, for example, they track whether or not the supply chain recommendations that ERA gives to the human planners were followed. And if the humans intervened, did that intervention make things better or worse? And what they're actually able to do is they're able to report back to the company. And unfortunately for the humans, what it's reporting back is that every time we interfere, we generally take things worse. And I think that's because, our human biases, our limited cognitive power, and our attachments, and I think this is the most important point, our attachments to past knowledge are bottlenecks and effectively the cause of bad decisions. So, at the moment we're asking for these systems to be glass boxes. We want to see what goes on in between. We want to see how it comes up with the numbers. I think that's going to change very rapidly as it gets to the point that not only will we not understand how it came up with that answer, we won't want to. We're just going to get to a point where we effectively trust it. Now, this is with traditional computing power, and of course, one thing that's on a double exponential curve is quantum computing. And we haven't really seen this yet in any sort of industrial setting. Volkswagen's been playing around with it, looking at it to control autonomous vehicles, and they've done some really interesting experiments with that. In the financial sector, JP Morgan spent a lot of money to try and help up on their risk strategies and their trading models. But what was has known is that the development in quantum computing is working at what they call this double exponential progress. So Moore's law is what's driven all of this tremendous amount of technological innovation from the fifth wave with all the computing revolutions, and you can see that on the left-hand side here. But now quantum computing is basically going at double exponential, and you can see the difference in the level of progress and the level of power that's being created. So Herbert Nevin, this is called this rate of progression is called Nevin's law, with Nevin's law replacing Moore's law. He's the director engineer at Google and the leader of their quantum AI laboratory. He said, he thinks most of the algorithms, most of the machine learning algorithms will be running on quantum computers within the next 10 years. And most of the things, this is a good thing. Now, one of the good things about this wave is that actually we don't have to spend a lot of time, going back to that slide, sorry, buying all of this stuff like we did with the ERP. We used to have our own service. Most of it effectively is now available as a service. So we can see them as a service. If I can just go back to that slide. My slide, while I'm clicking and what's happening is not two different things at the moment. So we can see most of these things as a service. Most of these products are a service here. We can see software as a service, logistics as a service, space as a service, transportation as a service, energy as a service. But interesting now, companies like Amazon, for example, as I'm saying, we've built all these really advanced algorithmic systems. We can make a business model out of that. Why don't we sell that as a service? Companies like Nokia, for example, are doing things like factory as a box, selling that as a service. All of these different tools coming together and being sold as a service, modular manufacturing as a service, robots as a service, AI as a service, even quantum computing as a service, which is being offered by Honeywell and, you guessed it, Amazon. Bringing these all together, and you end up something with what I've named the PAL supply chain. So the future supply chain is going to be incredibly personalized product, hyper-personalized services and experiences. It's going to be automated end-to-end, and it's going to be incredibly local. And when you bring those together, the benefit is actually the shorter the supply chain, the stronger the supply chain, but also the more sustainable it is, interestingly enough. So rather than shipping goods halfway around the world, we're actually able to deliver goods, from a very local location. And the more we use, drones and road robots and autonomous vehicles that are driven by electricity rather than by diesel, the much more sustainable it's going to be. So what we can see here is that the future effectively is looking nothing like the past. So we're having a plan that is reflected based on what happened rather than what's likely to happen. Is likely to be a plan that's going to be incorrect. The problem is, of course, is that companies are really struggling with this. Because as technology is increasing exponentially, people and organizations only change linearly. So we get a gap. We get a gap between the technological capabilities and the ability of humans and our organizations to adapt to that and make use of those technologies. This is reflected in our leadership as well. Most of the leaders came out of the sort of same age as me, Gen X people. We were trained in the downswing, when the rate of change was linear, but now we're in the upswing where the rate of change is exponential. And because we were trained in the downswing, it was all about cost control and management and leaning and managing costs. And basically the supply chain was invisible. No one really wanted to hear about the supply chain. We just wanted goods to go to customers. That was it. Now the supply chain is very highly visible, and impacts in the supply chain can dramatically impact your brand and your stock market price. But unfortunately, really what happened was that sort of those metrics and those behaviors that were driven in as a downswing behaviors are still there. These models are still there, and they affect the type of culture that's developed, the things that are measured, and the skills and behaviors that are valued. See, these fifth wave downswing behaviors still dominate many businesses. We've still got, lots of these barriers to change, short-term mindsets, need to show immediate ROI before we make any investments, constant pressure to meet analyst expectations, a lack of a long-term vision, silo behaviors, agendas, metrics, and initiatives. And one of the things that I find really, affects a lot of organizations is this absolute fear of taking risks. In fact, Amazon has said that's one of the reasons they really struggle when they take people from major blue chip organizations, is that they have to deprogram them to teach them that they are allowed to take risks at Amazon, and they really struggle with that. So overall, a lot of these companies are playing not to lose rather than playing to win. And this short-term feeding basically leads to constant functional focus. So, we've got drivers and metrics on sales, on finance, and on our operations that are driven around these silo-wise activities, which create this dynamic tension. So each department effectively could be hitting their targets, but overall the organization could be losing. So, we've got drivers around the sales saying, look, if we have, more products, if, we can be more innovative, we can increase our range, if we can, do more marketing spend, and we can increase sales. But you've got operations saying, yeah, but I want to reduce the range, and I want to, buy things offshore, and I want to buy in bigger volume, and I don't want to buy in smaller batches. And you've got finance saying, yeah, well, we want less inventory, and we want to reduce your costs, and can we outsource our logistics thing? And, you get this dynamic tension of these different metrics that just are not aligned. And that reflects itself with the digital projects that are being implemented. So, vast number of these digital initiatives that are taking place fail. Gartner identified that, 60% of companies surveyed said they've got a plan to invest in intelligent automation, but the same percentage of companies says they're not organizationally prepared for its adoption. So they want to do it, but they know it's going to fail, or they know it's going to struggle to be adopted. So there's two types of organizational projects. So the first type is deliberate strategic initiatives. They're designed to create value for customers, to drive the business model flywheel and support the corporate goal. And the second type, and this is where we see most of the types of digital projects, are autonomous initiatives. They're not intentionally induced by the corporate or business model strategy, and the business spends either great effort trying to align this initiative with the corporate strategy, or it doesn't try to align it at all. It's just doing it because everyone else is doing it, or it's a shiny thing that it thinks it needs to get involved with. And as a result, many companies fail to successfully operationalize their innovation efforts or gain any positive ROI from that. And in fact, there's a lot of work being done recently looking at innovation hubs, and a lot of companies have invested a lot of money in creating skunk works and innovation hubs, and it's not really delivered any great value for them because effectively they didn't know how to operationalize that. They didn't know how to bring it back into the business as usual. See, one thing to recognize is technology is not teleology. Technology is just a what, looking for a why. Without clarity as exactly how it's going to deliver some value to customers and to the business, digital projects are likely to be, disappointing. And what we're seeing what I see a lot of, certainly when I talk around to businesses all the time, is, companies end up being what I call initiative rich, but results poor. They're constantly kicking off projects, but they're never really getting the return for that investment. And they're also becoming incredibly data rich. So they're capturing lots and lots of data, but they're also becoming insights poor. They're not knowing what to do with the data that they're actually capturing, and not being able to translate it into a real actionable insight. So let's have a look at what the leaders are doing. So Gartner's top 25 supply chain report of last year has a sort of Premier League at the top there with Amazon, Apple, I think the other ones up there, I can't really see them now. And we can see what they're actually doing. The top 25 organizations are actually doing. I apologize. Yeah, McDonald's, P&G, and Unilever. Sorry. I forgot who the top five were. What they said in the report is that there's three key trends that stand out this year for these leaders that are accelerating their capabilities and further separating themselves from the pack. And these three capabilities were as follows. They were purpose-driven, they were business model transformers, and they were digital orchestrators. So they focused on long-term value creation, not short-term profit cost cutting. They're creating agile new business models with supply chain as enabler, and they understood how to use digital to turn each business model's flywheel. Now, I was quite interested to hear that because I must admit, that was exactly what I had put in my book as sort of the major things that organizations needed to be focusing on. And the 2 chapters, if you have a copy of my book, The New Business Mindset, and chapter 14, The Copernican Business Revolution, goes through exactly that. So we need to be really careful that we're not going to replace industrial silos with digital ones. When we talk about this, it's actually purpose drives the business model creation, and the business models are creating the purpose for implementing digital. It's not, let's have a purpose, let's build some business models, and let's do some digital projects. Digital should enable your strategy, not be your strategy. And I think this is a mistake a lot of organizations take. They think that going into digital tools, that in itself becomes its strategy. It doesn't. Digital's there to enable a strategy, to make a strategy better, either by delivering more value to customers or by allowing you to do things more effectively and more efficiently. So business transformation requires new mindsets, new business models, and then you can figure out how to use new machines. And I'm going to whip through this really quickly for time. So let's start with mindsets. So we start with mindsets first. So, successful digital transformation is not actually about technology, it's about transforming the mindset, the culture, and the strategy of the organization. The problem with transformation is never a lack of ideas. Every business has a whole host of ideas, but it ends up being a lack of the change in behavior. So we end up with analog mindsets in a digital world. And this upswing period here is when new companies thrive and others fail to survive. And the reason for that is because they're not, weighed down by traditional thinking and legacy infrastructure, legacy architecture, legacy business rules, legacy performance measures, and, sometimes quite restrictive legacy contracts. You see, digital is a project, it's not a journey or a destination. Sorry, it's a journey, not a destination. It requires a paradigm shift in the organization's mindset and opportunity to redefine what it stands for, how it operates, and what it rewards. Two quotes that I particularly like that I think really summarize the sort of mindset shifts you have to make at this point in time. The first one from Mark Twain, it says, "It ain't what you don't know that gets you into trouble, it's what you know for sure that just ain't so." People get too tied up to their existing knowledge when it's no longer relevant. We need to become comfortable with uncertainty. And the other one is Alvin Toffler's quote, which I know has been used a number of times now, which is, the illiterate of the 21st century will not be those who cannot read and write, but those who cannot learn, unlearn, and relearn. So we need to embrace the unknown and not fear it. So I'm going to go through this, and in fact, because of time, I've completely run out of time. I'm probably going to be my last slide here, but we're going to talk about the different mindsets and the cultures that we need to put in place here. So if we look at the industrial age compared to the digital age, what is the difference that we actually have to put in place here? So we're moving away from, trying to maximize value for shareholders to maximizing value from stakeholders. The goal is moving from protecting your particular market slice into actually growing the entire pie, or baking completely new pies where we create new business models and embrace new business models that we can actually add value to. We're moving from being firm first to consumer and customer first, something that I call a Copernican business revolution. We're moving from having the firm at the center of the universe to putting the customer at the center of the universe. We're also moving away from products and short-term profit focus into actually business models and long-term value. From a structural perspective, that means companies need to move away from instructions from above to ideas from everywhere. We want to move away from this command and control structure to being able to empower and enable people to make their own decisions, use actionable insight, and find out things for themselves. Which means we're moving away from efficient functions into agile, aligned, cross-process, end-to-end value chains. And rather than being designed around individual responsibilities, we need to design this for results. From a mindset perspective, that means, we've got to move from a fixed mindset where people are working on protecting the knowledge that you already have to a growth mindset where we're embracing uncertainty and looking forward to the challenge of learning new things. Move away from thinking about selling products to solving problems, moving away from cost control to value creation and decision making, and moving away from being, activity focused to becoming outcome focused. And from a cultural perspective, again, they start moving away from the rules because the rules may not apply anymore, and allow people to challenge the way we do things, have that freedom to ask the questions and to be able to challenge, the status quo. We move away from, our belief that, we have to have the answers, because we now know that our existing knowledge, might not be relevant moving forward. So knowledge and experience actually is becoming devalued in some respects. And in fact, what is valued is inquiry and creativity, the ability to ask the right questions. And we're going to move away from having to, try to avoid risks and move towards constant experimentation. So effectively, organizations are moving away from this sort of play not to lose mindset, because it doesn't work in the sense you've really got to set your ball ahead and play to win. Now, I haven't got the time to skip through this, so I'm just going to quickly, and I do apologize for having more material at the time. That, if anyone who's heard me speak before, you will know that is a regular issue with me. If I can just skip forward. I'll leave it on this slide, so the business model slide. So really what companies need to do, you need to really segment your organization to find out who are you serving, who are your customers, what do they really value, and what is your unique value proposition. So what problems do people have that they're prepared to pay to be solved, or for a need to be satisfied, and how can you uniquely solve that? And then align your execution capabilities around a strategy that brings together that value proposition to that customer. So what do they value? And that's a commercial strategy and a supply chain strategy. So whether or not you're focusing on being highly innovative, or being a product leader, or whether or not you're being a cost leader, bring those strategies together, reflect it onto your supply chain, and then design your execution capabilities, your networks, your performance measures, your culture, your people skills, to be able to solve that problem in such a way that it delights your customer. So we're bringing together our revenue streams and our cost structures in such a way that we're ultimately creating business models and competing on business models, so that we're able to look at those execution capabilities and that strategy and say, how best can we use these digital technologies in order to either create better value propositions, to communicate better with them through channels, to create better supply chain or more automated or more local supply chain networks, to automate our processes to remove human errors, or to effectively just create more effective execution capabilities that are strategically aligned to deliver that value proposition to that customer. Martin, I know I've overrun a little bit, so I will stop there, if I may, and pass it back to you.
Okay, Sean, thank you very much for your great presentation. I know you were called at short notice, so yesterday, so thank you for this. And the good news is I'm talking with Sean. He has written a marvelous book called Transition Point. I don't know, it's more than 1,000 pages, but I loved it, all the pages.
Come on.
Yeah, it's thick. But the good news is, we want to insert this transition point of parts of it in our knowledge base called SCM Wisdom. We don't take the whole book. We'll take bite-sized pieces of 2 to 3 minutes. So we cut this book in pieces, and then you will can get access to all his knowledge, what he's written down, and the transition point. And then you will see what kind of news items and article pieces he has come up with. So with this, thank you for your presentation. The good news is also we've also done 2 webinars last year. How to deal with all this. So even the recordings of those 2 webinars are still online and available. And see you later. And we will discuss further how we can use your knowledge and collaborate in that sense. Thanks again.